Shalom, friends. This week we had the opportunity to host 5 visiting families from southern Israel who lived in the kibbutz communities and experienced the horror of the Hamas massacre on October 7th in the Holy Land of Israel. Some of their neighbors were murdered and slaughtered by Hamas, while others were kidnapped and are held in captivity in Gaza. These families came to Nashville for some respite from the trauma and the horrors they experienced. And we had the privilege to host them for Shabbat dinner this past Friday night. At the dinner, one of the young moms stood up and spoke about her experience on October 7th, filled with emotion and tears as she described the moments of terror and how she thought her life and her family's life was coming to an end. Yet God spared her and her family, and they experienced a miracle, and they were here to tell their story. Friends, these are people with resilience who shared the words of inspiration that when they faced darkness and terror, they were strong. They prayed to the one above. And they told us we should not cower and give in to the fear that is promoted around the world and have faith in the one above like they had in those moments. Friends, there wasn't a dry eye in the room as this young mom shared her story, and over 200 guests were inspired to thank the one above for the blessings in their lives that at times they may take for granted. And as many went home that night, they resolved to be there for one another now more than ever, and to be a united, stronger family together. It was the most magnificent evening of hope and faith and courage. They might have been simple families living in southern Israel, but to our Nashville community, they were heroes. Have you ever thought about this? Who is Judaism's most decorated general? Who is Judaism's one of the most famous heroes? Out of the many leaders and warriors who led our people in history, who is the one to receive the most attention thousands of years later? If you look into the prayer rites and the Siddur, in the prayer book, and the answer is clear. For 8 days of Hanukkah, in every prayer and every time we recite the grace after meals, we mention the following words. In the days of Matisyahu, son of Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, the high priest of the Hashmonaim, and his sons, when the wicked kingdom rose up against your nation Israel, to make them forget your Torah, and to remove them from the laws of your will. And you, God, in your great mercy, saved them all. This is Matisyahu of the Hashmonaim, the father of Judah the Maccabee, the hero of the story of Hanukkah. This is astonishing, because in all our prayers, we rarely have a mention of Moses, the greatest leader of our nation of all times. We never recite in the days of Moses, the son of Amram, when Pharaoh oppressed the Jews in Egypt. We don't find any prayer that mentions the mighty stories of Joshua, who brought the nation in the Holy Land and conquered the kings there. We don't have any prayers about King David or his son Solomon, the wisest man of all time, or the efforts of Ezra and Nehemiah to restore the Jewish presence in Israel after the Babylonian exile. None of these remarkable leaders or their feats are mentioned in our prayers. Yet, of all leaders and warriors, it is only Matisyahu, the father of Judah the Maccabee, who receives special mention. Why? What did he do that stood out over anyone else? What was his great merit? There's another question that emerges from the text that we recite on the prayer of Hanukkah. After reading about Matisyahu, the great hero, the text reads as follows. You, God, in your great mercy, you stood up for them, the Jewish people, in their time of distress. You turned over the strong, the Greeks, in the hand of the weak, and the many in the hands of the few, and the impure in the hands of the pure, and the wicked in the hands of the righteous, and the sinners in the hands of those who study your Torah. If you're paying attention, you will notice 5 unique descriptions about this battle. Strong in the hands of the weak, many in the hands of the few, impure in the hands of the pure, wicked in the hand of the richest, and sinners in the hand of Torah students. Out of the 5 on this list, it's only the first 2 that really make sense, because it's indeed unnatural for an army of a few to vanquish many, as it is for the weak to overpower the strong. But what do the other 3 descriptions add to the magnitude of the miracle? I mean, why would we expect the impure to triumph over the pure, such that when the opposite happens, it's considered a miracle? I mean, why would the fact that the losing party was wicked and the winning part was righteous magnify the scope of the miracle any more than if it was done the other way around? And also the same can be asked of the last description of sinners in the hands of those involved in Torah. I mean, what do these last 3 descriptions have to do with the specifics of warfare? In a fascinating talk that the Rebbe shared on this Shabbat many years ago, he sheds words of wisdom on this question. It's a light that shines bright throughout today, this very day. That Matisyahu, the leader of the Maccabees, was indeed a leader unlike any other, for he waged a battle unlike any other. It was a battle of values. You see, Moses, he fought for Jewish survival and liberation under the heel of the Egyptians. Mordechai, in the time of Queen Esther, he stood up against a threat of genocide of the Jewish people. Yet Matisyahu faced no such threat. His battle wasn't one of life and death, rather one of religious liberty. As the history books will testify, the Greeks of the Matisyahu age, they didn't wish to destroy the Jewish temple or to slaughter or exile Jews. To the contrary, they actually invested in the infrastructure of Jerusalem, making the city grand in the trademark Greek style, and even rebranded it with a new, hip, trendy name, Antioch, for the king Antiochus. They respected Jewish scholars. They went as far as to request a Greek translation from the Jews of the most reverend text. They wanted them to translate the entire Torah into Greek. Jews and Jewish culture were not a problem for the Greeks. It was actually Judaism they despised. What were the mitzvot that the mighty Greek Empire immediately set out to ban? Well, those were the mitzvot that the Greeks knew, which touch at the heart of Judaism and is godly in nature. For example, Shabbat, the bris, and the Jewish calendar. These 3 mitzvot actually literally set Jewish life apart in time, space, and spirit. And this was the battle of Matisyahu. Saber-rattling genocidal maniacs were not the enemy, rather polite, cultured, sophisticated, aristocratic, savvy Greeks who wished to wage a cultural and religious war of identity. You can only imagine how hard it was to enlist soldiers to such a war. Picture Matisyahu approaching a young, able-bodied Judean and asking him to join arms against the Greeks. Now, Matisyahu, may have been a good man, but if I have my home and my family and a full fridge stocked with everything I needed, you might say, why are you dragging us to an impossible war? Do you seriously expect me to throw all of this simply away because I have to switch out my calendar, to live according to a Jewish calendar? To make it not even harder to crack, Matisyahu wasn't just facing against anyone. He was actually fighting against everyone, because in his time, the Greeks dominated the culture. Everyone thought just like the Greeks. And there was a social pressure that was put in place, and everyone conformed and they fell into line because the Greeks controlled the media, the entertainment, the main street, the commerce, the sports, the fashion, and everything in between. So can you imagine how hard it must have been to swim against this immense social pressure? If you saw a talking head on TV talking about how everyone is buying this new product, come on. Doesn't that make you want to buy that same product? If you sit down at an event and 9 other people at the table ordered salmon, you go to a restaurant, 9 people order salmon, tell me, wouldn't you do the same? Because that's how humans work. We are incredibly influenced by public opinion and by social pressure. And if everyone's doing it, that makes you do the same. So Matisyahu, the leader of the Maccabees, he was up against a sentiment that said, Rabbi, you cannot possibly fight this new cool calendar. I mean, everyone's adopting it. So why are you going against the trend? I mean, you mean you want to fight against watching the latest Greek shows in the Colosseum? Are you nuts? Everyone is doing it. It may be like telling someone today, you know what? Don't go on Google, don't buy on Amazon, don't touch social media, don't use email, never sign into Netflix, following sports, don't watch the news. I mean, there are actually proven social experiments that demonstrate just how far this reality can go, to such an extent that people actually lose their sense of choice against social pressure. I read recently about an experiment conducted by Solomon Asch. They took 50 male students from the Swarthmore College in the United States, and they participated in a vision test. And they're using a line judgment task. Asch put a naive participant in a room with 7 Confederate stooges. And the Confederates have agreed in advance what their responses will be when presented with the line task. Now, the real participant didn't know this, and he was led to believe that the other 7 contender stooges, they were also real participants, like themselves. So Asch, he measured the number of times each participant conformed to the majority view. And on average, about 1/3, 32% of the participants who were placed in this situation went along and conformed with clearly the incorrect majority on these critical trials. And over these 12 trials, about 75% of participants conformed at least once, and 25% of the participants never conformed. But by contrast, when there was no pressure to conform to the Confederates, less than 1% of participants gave the wrong answer. Now, you may ask, hey, why did the participants conform so readily? I mean, when they were interviewed after the experience, most of them said they didn't really believe their conforming answers. They didn't believe what they were answers. But they went along with the group for fear of being ridiculed or laughed or thought, that the peculiar, I mean, they thought they would be different. And that's why they did that. You know the famous story about a guy who, story takes place around the turn of the 20th century, a man named Vladimir. He was an illiterate, he was from Siberia, he was a peasant. He struck it rich. So one day he was offered a very lucrative business proposition. And to close the deal, he had to travel from Siberia to Moscow. That was a faraway place. And, and how is he even going to make it there? He thought even his horse and buggy wouldn't go there to make this trip of several thousand kilometers. So some of the more sophisticated residents of his town came to his rescue. They said, Vladimir, don't worry. There's some things new. It's a new mode of transportation. It's called the train. If you go to the city called Novosibirsk, it was the closest large city, you will be able to catch a train to Moscow. So one day, Vladimir finds himself in the central station of Novosibirsk, and he informs the lady behind the ticket counter of his intended trip. He wants to get to his destination. He wants to get to Moscow. And the lady says, what kind of ticket do you want to purchase for this train trip? So she was observing his confusion. She told him that, you know what? You have 3 choices. Either you purchase a first or a second or third class ticket. She says, a third class ticket, you know what that means? There's no amenities, and there's not even a guaranteed spot on the train. I mean, if you arrive at the train station and it's already full to its capacity, you're going to have to wait for the next one. A second class ticket, you have much greater chance of a spot on the train, with a little bit more comfortable accommodations. But a first class ticket, that's a guaranteed seat. All the amenities necessary to have a luxurious and comfortable journey. Well, the truth is, for Vladimir, money wasn't really an issue. So he says, give me a first class ticket. And the lady she said that this ticket was non-refundable and you must watch it very carefully. He pays for the ticket, he takes her advice, and he tucks it beneath many layers. He was wearing a lot of clothes. It was cold in Russia. He takes the ticket, puts it in between many of his layers of clothing that he was wearing. Now, it turned out the train really wasn't going to go for a few more days, so he noted the date, the time of its arrival, and when he has to be in the station. And he stayed locally in a local motel for this duration of time. As the time came closer, he went back to the station 2 hours early. And this was his first time going on such a journey. So he decided, I don't really know what to do, where to go. Let me follow the next guy. And he assumes, what, if he copies the other guy, he's doing the right thing. The train arrives. First he was shocked. Wow, look at this big caravan of cars. He never saw such a thing in his life. He regained his composure. He scanned the terminal, to see where to go. And since it was a little early, most of the passengers didn't arrive yet, but he noticed that there were 3 passengers boarding the very last car of the train. He followed them into the car. And when each one of these climbed beneath one of the benches in the back of the train, Vladimir thought that's what you do. He did the same. Now, unfortunately, he wasn't familiar with the proper stowaway protocol, and he hid under the bench like the other guys did, and his feet were sticking out over the aisle in this third-class car. It was dark, it was lonely beneath the bench, and Vladimir dozed off. He didn't feel the train start to move. He didn't hear the conductor entering the car. He did, however, feel a sharp kick to his shins. And this peasant, was pulled out from under the bench by the conductor. The conductor says, "You moron, you think this is a free train ride? You need a ticket to ride this train." Vladimir says, hey, calm down. What's the problem? I have a ticket. All the other travelers in the car, they burst out laughing at this ludicrous claim. And their laughter only intensified when this guy, Vladimir, started taking off his layer after layer to get to the ticket. One jacket and a sweater and his shirt. And he takes off his expensive coat. He takes everything. And to much of their astonishment, he pulls out a ticket. A first-class ticket. Not any ticket. The first-class ticket he bought. The conductor verified and he said, "Wow, this is authentic." And in a humble tone, he asked the obvious question, "Sir, you have an expensive first-class ticket. Please tell me, why are you lying under a bench in the third-class car?" And he said, "Well, because that's what others were doing." He said that in a very embarrassed tone. You see, friends, Mattisyahu, the leader of the Maccabees, he was faced with the impossible challenge of fighting the accepted truth. The Greeks were everything in his day, and the truth be told, they still are in a way. Philosophy, democracy, so much culture was born in Greece and is upheld until this day. The entire notion of the Western culture was founded in Greece, the flagship country of the West. Mattisyahu's courageous act was to stand up to all of the above and boldly declare, the Greeks are smart. They do know a lot of things, but not everything. They may have indeed reached the pinnacle of human achievement, but there are greater values than the humanities. Yes, it may be impossible to find satisfying scientific explanations for keeping Shabbat, for doing the bris to a child, a baby boy. But there are some eternal matters in life that are beyond reason and science. They tell a story about a menorah that outlived the Nazis. It's a story with no rational explanation, but it still lives on. This story took place in Kiel, Germany in 1932. The rabbi, his name was Rabbi Dr. Akiva Posner. He and his wife Rachel, they lit their menorah in 1932 Germany and placed it on their windowsill. Directly across the street was a big Nazi flag. Now we know, as we shared in the past, one of the essential components of Hanukkah is to share the miracle, advertising and promoting the miracle. As such, according to Jewish law, many people place the menorah in a visible place when people pass by. It's like a billboard of light publicizing the supernatural luminary of the sublime. And many people place it at the window or at the door. And the rabbis instituted one caveat to this requirement, that in times of danger, they said, don't light the menorah and candles in a place in your home that can put you in a dangerous situation. Put it away from the outside hostile world. So they really didn't have to light it in Kiel 1932 by the window. But this family, they didn't rely on this loophole. Just before Hitler's rise to power in 1932, their menorah shone brightly for all their neighbors to see. its light and the meaning behind it. It was made more incandescent given the symbol of Jew hatred hanging from the building across the street, the swastika across the street. And here was the menorah, because they said, we're Jew and I'm proud. And the poignancy of this juxtaposition didn't escape Rachel Posner. So she took out a camera, one of the old cameras. She took a photo of the menorah and the swastika in one. And on its back of the photo, she scribbled in German, "Death to Judah, so says the flag, but Judah will live forever." So the light answers. Now, the rabbi and his wife and the 3 children left Germany for the Holy Land in 1933. And they managed to persuade many of their congregants to leave as well. Friends, the menorah they took with them, for 51 weeks a year, it sits in the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem. But each year, right before Hanukkah, this week, the family takes the menorah back and puts it to good use. And today, this family's great-grandson, Akiva Baruch Mansbach, who's named for the original Rabbi Akiva Posner, he lights the menorah every year. And the war cry of light of this family's menorah almost a century ago was Matisyahu's war cry of light more than 2 millennia ago. How could we bow down when we were put on this world to stand tall? How could we conform to the friends of fickle humanity when we were destined to transform humankind by the eternal light of divine? How could an evil flag proclaim Judah's death when our light proclaims Judah's eternal life? This, then, the Rebbe explains, is the depth hidden behind and beneath the words, the impure in the hands of the pure, the wicked in the hands of the righteous. The passage speaks not of the Greeks, but actually of a far sadder and painful reality. It was of those Jews who crossed the Rubicon and joined the Hellenistic culture of the time. It's one thing to fight a clear enemy out to kill you, but it's an entirely a different matter to counter internal forces that wish to shape and misshape you. That, my friends, is an uphill battle most would be unable to wage. And that, for most of us, is the battle of today in 2023. Because Matisyahu didn't waver. He torched the apathy of the Jewish public and reminded them they are not wicked. They are not impure like their Greek hosts. Rather, they are righteous. They are pure, with a glorious heritage to defend and uphold to death. Once kindled, his Jewish revival swept through the masses and overthrew the Greek influence forever. And that, for all of us, is the victory cry of today, of Hanukkah today. And that's why, out of all of our leaders and warriors, it is Matisyahu and his children who gained eternal mention. For they demonstrated what it means to stand proud as a Jew, regardless of whatever anyone else says in the world or is thinking about you. Friends, at a different opportunity, the Rebbe demonstrated how already earlier in history there was another courageous Jew with this Hashmonahum spirit. His name was Joseph, from the Bible in the book of Genesis. Professor Green, a famous Jewish professor, wrote a book. And in his book, he was a famous scientist. He worked for NASA. He actually worked on researching life on Mars. And Professor Green wrote a book, and he relates in the book that he heard from the Rebbe that said, "We recently read in the Torah portion of this Shabbat of the astonishing encounter between Joseph and his brothers, that after 22 long, painful years, fate brought the two together, and the family was reunited. Now, after the initial shock that this was Joseph, the one they sold so many years earlier, Joseph said to his brothers, listen, forget about what happened. Let's sit down for lunch. Let's have a meal together." And it said that they sat separately from all the Egyptians. Why did he insist eating apart from the Egyptians? Everyone knows the best way to make good friends and good connections and close any deal is to have a business lunch with them. And Joseph was the Egyptian minister of interior, not to mention the minister of economy. I mean, wouldn't it make sense for Joseph to invite anyone and everyone for lunch and see where things go? What's with these newcomers from abroad? What could they present to you? It might be the most ideal to grab a bite and sit what comes out of it, sit together, get to know them. So why did Joseph, this second in command in the entire Egypt, plan for a separate lunch for him and his brothers? And the Rebbe said to Professor Green something very powerful, something we need to think about. He said Joseph wished to broadcast to the Egyptians that though he might be their leader, the minister of economy, and the minister of interior, and deeply involved in everyday Egyptian life, at the end of the day, he was not an Egyptian. They're good people, maybe, but he had his mission and his ethos. And so my lunch is different than yours. And Joseph said, I will not break bread and seek to integrate myself from those that have a different culture, a different language, and a different mission and a way of life. And it was this attitude that provided Joseph with the fortitude to live in Egypt for so long, yet remain true to his Jewish values throughout. Because Egypt of that era was not the finest and kindest people. And everyone knows that an environment has a profound impact on its citizens. And spiritually, they were not the best impact it could have had on Joseph and his family. But Joseph knew that he had to remember where he came from and who he is. And because, though, this lunch was forever distinct from his Egyptian peers, he knew that he had to have his time with his siblings. And Professor Green relates how those words from the Rebbe rung loudly in his ears. Right then and there, he decided that he's always going to wear his kippah, even though he wants to assimilate in society, because he wants to be like Joseph. He too was a servant of God, a messenger of the King of all kings. He was an ambassador of a unique nation with a unique message. Even if he works at NASA or wherever he is in the world, he's going to wear his kippah. He's going to say, I'm a Jew and I'm proud. Friends, the chief rabbi of Russia, his name is Rabbi Beryl Lazar. And he once received a call from the president of Russia on the Thursday before Hanukkah from the Kremlin. And he says, the president wanted to see him the very next day at the Kremlin, which would have been a Friday, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The rabbi's heart, he was very worried. He said, in Russia in the winter, it's a short day. The Shabbat begins 3:30. He has to make it enough time home to light the menorah and then light the Shabbos candles. And if the meeting's at 12, there'll be a little bit of a delay. It can cause a problem. Where's he going to light the menorah? But the secretary assured him, noon is noon. Don't worry. You're going to have your meeting at noon. You'll be out at 12:30. You'll make it home on time. The next day, the Rabbi Lazar, comes early to the Kremlin to meet with the president. But if before him, there was a delegation from Britain's prime minister who was meeting with the president. And their meeting was running over time. The president said, don't worry. That meeting needs to happen. But everything will be fine, Rabbi. You'll get home for Shabbos. Rabbi Lazar was very anxious. He sent a message to his wife, send my menorah to the Kremlin just in case I don't make it on time for Shabbat. And I'm going to pray for a miracle. And it was only at 2 p.m., 90 minutes before Shabbos, that Rabbi Lazar met with the president of Russia. And the meeting wasn't short. He only came out 3 o'clock, 30 minutes to Shabbat. And the rabbi knew he has to light the menorah right then in the Kremlin. So he said, please, let me light my menorah here. And they took him to the beautiful palace, beautiful room with a big dining room table. And they said, put your menorah here. The rabbi said, no, I need to light my menorah in the doorway. That's the Chabad tradition. The problem was, okay, well, we'll schlep the table to the door. But you were not allowed to light a fire in the Kremlin. The rabbi said, listen, I need a fire. The chef from the kitchen took his cigarette lighter. The rabbi used his lighter. He schlepped the table to the door from the Kremlin, and he put his menorah there. He had the lighter, and he lit the menorah moments before sunset. He made the blessings, and he hung around for a few minutes after to watch the candles, as Jewish law requires to do. And he then put on his heavy coat, and it was Shabbat, and he prepared to walk home in the freezing Russian winter. As he stepped outside to walk home, the hour-and-a-half walk, the Russian minister of religion was also putting on his coat. He was going outside. Bewildered, the rabbi said, hey, where are you going? The minister said, I am walking home with you, Rabbi. You are our guest, and we will not allow you to leave us on your own. We want to show you the appropriate honor. Now together, here you have Rabbi Lazar and this important minister walking all the way for an hour and a half to the rabbi's home on Shabbat on a cold Russian winter night. And as they walked, the rabbi said to the minister of religion, what Nobody thought of this ruckus the rabbi made to light his menorah in the Kremlin. He said, I needed a doorway, I needed a table, I needed this fire. I mean, did you think I was crazy? Tell me the truth, minister. And the minister responded as follows. Dear Rabbi, do you really think that we can't find Jewish leaders who take their religion less seriously than you? We know that people who don't stay loyal to their values won't be loyal to their word, and they cannot be relied upon. Only someone who stands strong in his convictions has a spine. That is the type of person we seek to partner with. Friends, the chief rabbi of Russia immediately understood that Gentiles respect Jews who respect themselves. Joseph lived it. Matisyahu fought for it. The rabbi in Germany proclaimed it, and we today shine it bright for ourselves, for our families, and for the entire world to see. Friends, be resilient, be strong, and live a life with faith and trust in the one above, and you will surely reach great heights. Wishing you, my friends, a Shabbat of great pride, a Shabbat of resilience, a Shabbat to show the world who you are. I am a Jew and I'm proud, and I'll say it out loud, for that's what I'll always be. Until next time, God bless you, and may you and your family be blessed with a joyous and happy Hanukkah. Shalom.